I'm live. It is the 5th of January and I'm reading Travels with My Aunt. It's a novel by Greene, published in 1969, and it describes his meeting his Aunt Augusta at his mother's funeral. He hadn't seen her for 50 years and she is a great traveller, and she takes him along. They're on their way to Istanbul, chapter 15. For some reason, an old restaurant car with a kind of faded elegance was attached to the express after the Turkish frontier, when it was already too late to be of much use. My aunt rose that day early, and the two of us sat down to an excellent coffee, toast and jam. Aunt Augusta insisted on our drinking, in addition, a light red wine, though I am not accustomed to wine so early in the morning. Outside the window, an ocean of long, undulating grass stretched to a pale green horizon. There was the talkative cheerfulness of journey's end in the air, and the car filled with passengers whom we had never seen before. A Vietnamese in blue dungarees spoke to a rumpled girl in shorts, and two young Americans, the man with hair as long as the girl's, joined them, holding hands. They refused a second cup of coffee after carefully counting their money. "Where's Thule?" my aunt asked. She wasn't feeling well last night. I'm worried about her, Aunt Augusta. Her young man's hitchhiking to Istanbul. He may not have arrived. He may even have gone on without her. Where to? She's not sure. Kathmandu or Vientiane. Istanbul is a rather unpredictable place, Aunt Augusta said. I'm not even sure what I expect to find there myself. What do you think you'll find? I have a little business to do with an old friend, General Abdul. I was expecting a telegram at the St. James in Albany, but none came. I can only hope that there's a message waiting for us at the Pera Palace. Who is the General? I knew him in the days of poor Mr. Visconti, my aunt said. He was very useful to us in the negotiations with Saudi Arabia. He was Turkish ambassador then, in Tunis. What parties we had in those days at the Excelsior! A little different from the Crown and Anchor and a drink with poor Wordsworth. The scenery changed as we approached Istanbul. The grassy sea was left behind and the express slowed down to the speed of a little local commuter's train. When I leant from the window, I could see over a wall into the yard of a cottage. I was in talking distance of a red-skirted girl who looked up at us as we crawled by. A man mounted a bicycle and for a while kept pace with us. Birds on a red-tiled roof looked down their long beaks and spoke together like village gossips. I said, I'm awfully afraid that Thule is going to have a baby. She ought to take precautions, Henry, but in any case, it's far too early for you to worry. Good heavens, Aunt Augusta, I didn't mean that. How can you possibly think? It's a natural conclusion, my aunt said. You have been much together, and the girl has a certain puppy charm. I am too old for that sort of thing. You are too young. You are a young man in your 50s, Aunt Augusta replied. The door of the restaurant car changed, and there was Thule, but a Thule transformed. Perhaps it was only that she had put on less shadow, but her eyes seemed to be sparkling, as I had never known them do before. Hi, she called down the length of the car. The four people turned and looked at her and called back, hi, as though they had long been acquainted. Hi, she greeted them in return, and I felt a small ache of jealousy, irrational as the irritations of early morning. Good morning, she said to the two of us. She seemed to be speaking a different language to the old. Oh, Mr. Pulling, it's happened. What's happened? The curse. I've got the curse. I was right, you see. The jolting of the train. I mean, it did do it. I've had a terrible bellyache, But I feel fabulous. I can't wait to tell Julian. Oh, I hope he's at the Greene when I get there. You're going to the Greene? The American boy called across. Yes, are you? Sure, we can all go together. That's fabulous. Come and have a coffee if you've got the money. You don't mind, do you? Tully said to my aunt. They're going to the Greene too. Of course we don't mind, Tully. You've been so kind, Mr. Pulling, she said. I don't know what I'd have done without you. I mean, it was a bit like the dark night of the soul. I realized then that I preferred her to call me Smudge. Go gently on the cigarettes, Tully, I advised her. Oh, she said, I don't need to economize now. They'll be easy to get. I mean, at the Greene, you can get anything at the Greene, even acid. I'll be seeing you both again before we go, won't I? But she didn't. She had become one of the young now, and I could only wave to her back as she went ahead of us through the customs. The two Americans still walked hand in hand, and the Vietnamese boy carried Tully's sack and had his arm around her shoulders to protect her from the crowd which was squeezing to get through the barrier into the customs hall. My responsibility was over, but she stayed on in my memory like a small persistent pain, which worried even in its insignificance. Doesn't a sickness as serious as cancer start in such a way? I wondered whether Julian was waiting for her. Would they go on to Kathmandu? Would she always remember to take her pill? When I shaved again more closely at the Palace, I found I had missed in the obscurity of my coach a small dab of lipstick upon the cheek. Perhaps that was why my aunt had jumped to so wrong a conclusion. Perhaps that was why my aunt had... I wiped it off and found myself wondering at once where she was now. I scowled at my own face in the glass, but I was really scowling at her mother in Bonn, and her father somewhere in the CIA, and Julian, afraid of castration, and at all those who ought to have been looking after her, and yet felt no responsibility at all. Aunt Augusta and I had lunch in a restaurant called Abdullah's, and then she took me around the tourist sites, the Blue Mosque and Santa Sofia, but I could tell all the time that she was worried. There had been no message waiting for her at the hotel. Can you telephone to the general? I asked her. Even at the Tunis embassy, she said, he never trusted his own line. We stood dutifully in the center of Santa Sofia. The shape, which had been beautiful once perhaps, was obscured by ugly Arabic signs in pale khaki, so that it looked like the huge drab waiting hall of a railway station out of peak traffic hours. A few people stood about looking for the times of trains, and there was a man who carried a suitcase. I had forgotten how hideous it was, my aunt said. Let's go home. Home was an odd word to use for the Palace, which had the appearance of an Eastern pavilion built for a world fair. My aunt ordered 2 racks in the bar, which was all fretwork and mirrors. There was still no message from General Abdul, and for the first time I saw my aunt nonplussed. When did you last hear from him? I asked. I told you. I heard from him in London the day after those policemen came, and I had a message from him in Milan through Mario. Everything was in order, he said. If there had been any change, Mario would have known. It's early dinner time. I don't want any food. I'm sorry, Henry. I feel a little upset. Perhaps it is the result of the train's vibration. I shall go to bed and wait for the telephone. I cannot believe that he will let me down. Mr. Visconti had a great belief in General Abdul, and there were very few people whom he trusted. I had dinner by myself in the hotel in a vast restaurant, which reminded me of Santa Sofia. Not a very good dinner. I had drunk 7 rakis, to which I was unaccustomed, and perhaps the absence of my aunt made me a little light-headed. I was not ready for bed, and I wished I had Thule with me as companion. I went outside the hotel and found a taxi driver there who spoke a little English. He told me he was Greek, but that he knew Istanbul as well as if it were his own city. Safe, he kept on saying, safe with me, waving his hand as though to indicate that there were wolves lurking by the walls and alleys. I told him to show me the city. He drove down narrow streets after narrow street with no vista anywhere and very little light, and then drew up at a dark and forbidding door with a bearded night watchman asleep on the step. Safe house, he said. Safe, clean, very safe. And I was reminded uncomfortably of something I would have gladly forgotten, the house with the sofas behind the Messaggero. No, I said, drive on. I didn't mean that. I tried to explain. Take me, I said, somewhere quiet, somewhere you would go yourself, with your friends, for a drink, with your friends. We drove several miles along the Sea of Marmara and came to a stop outside a plain, uninteresting building marked West Berlin Hotel. Nothing could have belonged less to the Istanbul of my imagination. It was 3 square stories high and might well have been built among the ruins of Berlin by a local contractor at low cost. The driver led the way into a hall, which occupied the whole ground space of the hotel. A young woman stood by a small piano and sang what I supposed were sentimental songs to an audience of middle-aged men in their shirt sleeves, sitting at big tables drinking beer. Most of them, like my own driver, had big grey moustaches, and they applauded heavily and dutifully when the song was over. Glasses of beer were placed in front of us, and the driver and I drank to each other. It was a good beer, I noticed, and when I poured it on top of all the raki and the wine I had already drunk, my spirits rose. In the young girl I saw a resemblance of her Thule, and in the heavy men around me I imagined, "Do you know General Abdul?" I asked the driver. He hushed me quickly. I looked around and again realized that there was not a single woman in the big hall except the young singer. And at this moment the piano stopped, and with a glance at the clock, which marked midnight, the girl seized her handbag and went out through a door at the back. Then, after the glasses had been refilled, the pianist struck up a more virile tune, and all the middle-aged men rose and put their arms around each other's shoulders and began to dance, forming circles, which they enlarged, broke, and formed again. They charged, they retreated, they stamped the ground in unison. No one spoke to his neighbour. There was no drunken jollity. I was like an outsider at some religious ceremony, of which he couldn't interpret the symbols. Even my driver left me to put his arm around another man's shoulder and drank more beer to drown my sense of being excluded. And I drank more beer to drown my sense of being excluded. I was drunk. I knew that, for drunken tears stood in my eyes, and I wanted to throw my beer glass on the floor and join the dancing. But I was excluded, as I had always been excluded. Thule had joined her young friends, and Miss Keene had departed to cousins in Koffiefontein, leaving her tatting on a chair under the Van der Velde. I would always be protected, as I had been when a cashier, by a hygienic plastic screen behind the hygienic plastic screen. Even the breath of the dancers didn't reach me as they circled my table. My aunt was probably talking about things which mattered to her with General Abdul. She had greeted her adopted son in Milan more freely than she had ever greeted me. She had said goodbye to Wordsworth in Paris with blown kisses and tears in her eyes. She had a world of her own to which I would never be admitted, and I would have done better, I told myself, if I had stayed with my dahlias and the ashes of my mother, who was not, if my aunt were to be believed, my real mother, my real one. So I sat on the West Berlin Hotel, shedding beery tears of self-pity and envying the men who danced with their arms around strangers' shoulders. "Take me away," I said to the driver when he returned. "Finish your beer, but take me away." "You are not pleased?" he asked as we drove uphill towards the Pera Palace. "I am tired, that's all. I want to go to bed." 2 police cars blocked our way outside the Pera Palace. An elderly man who carried a walking stick crooked over his left arm was reaching with a stiff right leg towards the ground as we drew on. My driver told me in a tone of awe, "That is Colonel Hakim." The colonel wore a very English suit of grey flannel with chalk scribes, and he had a small grey moustache. He looked like any veteran member of the army and navy, alighting at his club. "Very important man," the driver told me. "Very fair to Greeks." I went past the colonel into the hotel. The receptionist was standing in the entrance, presumably to welcome him. I was of so little importance that he wouldn't shift to let me by. I had to walk round him, and he didn't answer my good night. A lift took me up to the 5th floor. When I saw a light under my aunt's door, I tapped and went in. She was sitting upright in bed, wearing a bed jacket, and she was reading a paperback with a lurid cover. "I've been seeing Istanbul," I told her. "So have I." The curtains were drawn back, and the light of the city lay below us. She put her book away. The jacket showed a naked young woman lying in bed with a knife in her back, regarded by a man with a cruel face and a red fez. The title was Turkish Delight. I had been absorbing local atmosphere, she said. "Is the man in the fez the murderer?" "No, he's the policeman, a very unpleasant type called Colonel Hakim." How very odd, because the murder takes place at this very Pera Palace, but there are a good many details wrong, as you might expect from a novelist. The girl is loved by a British agent, secret agent, a tough, sentimental man called Amos, and they have dinner together on her last night at Abdullah's. You remember, we had lunch there ourselves. They have a love scene too in Santa Sofia, and there is an attempt on Amy's life at the Blue Mosque. We might almost have been doing a literary pilgrimage. "Hardly literary," I said. "Oh, you're your father's son. He tried to make me read Walter Scott, especially Rob Roy. But I much prefer this. It moves a great deal quicker and there are fewer descriptions." "Did Amos murder her?" "Of course not, but he is suspected by Colonel Hakim, who has very cruel methods of interrogation," my aunt said with relish. The telephone rang. I answered it. "Perhaps it's General Abdul at last," she said, "though it seems a little late for him to ring." "This is the reception speaking. Is Miss Bertram there?" "Yes. What is it?" "I'm sorry to disturb her, but Colonel Hakim wishes to see her." "At this hour? Quite impossible. Why?" "He's on the way up now." He rang off. "Colonel Hakim is on the way to meet you," I said. "Colonel Hakim? The real Colonel Hakim? He's a police officer too." A police officer, Aunt Augusta said. Again? I begin to think I'm back in the old days, with Mr. Visconti. Henry, will you open my suitcase, the green one? You will find a light coat there, fawn, with a fur collar. Yes, Aunt Augusta, I have it here. Under the coat, in a cardboard box, you will find a candle of a decorated candle. Yes, I see the box. Take out the candle, but be careful because it's rather heavy. Put it on my bedside table and light it. Candlelight is better for my complexion. It was extraordinarily heavy, and I nearly dropped it. It probably had some kind of lead weight in the bottom, I thought, to hold it steady. A big brick of scarlet wax which stood a foot high. It was decorated on all four sides with scrolls and coats of arms. A great deal of artistry had gone into moulding the wax, which would melt away only too quickly. I lit the wick. Now, turn out the light, my aunt said, adjusting her bed jacket and puffing up her pillows. There was a knock on the door and Colonel Harkin came in. He stood in the doorway and bowed. Miss Bertram, he asked. Yes, you are Colonel Harkin? Yes, I'm sorry to call on you so late without warning. He spoke English with only the faintest intonation. I think we have a mutual acquaintance. General Abdul? May I sit down? Of course, you'll find that chair by the dressing table the most comfortable. This is my nephew, Henry Pulling. Good evening, Mr. Pulling. I hope you enjoyed the dancing at the West Berlin Hotel, a convivial spot unknown to most tourists. May I turn on the light, Miss Bertram? I would rather not. I have weak eyes, and I always prefer to read by candlelight. A very beautiful candle. That they make them in Venice. The coats of arms belong to their four greatest doges. Don't ask me their names. How is General Abdul? I had been hoping to meet him again. And I shall make here a break, because it is quite a long chapter. Have a lovely first Monday of the year.